Hello everyone, this is ponderonweather. In this update, we've got a strong cold front on the way with very heavy rain and concerned about flash flooding in the coming days, as well as the tropics are looking to ignite. Welcome back everyone, ponderonweather here with another update. This is Wednesday morning. If you do like detailed weather breakdowns, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it this morning and take a look at the overall big picture. And you can definitely see the overall setup, what's happening currently right now with this developing trough that's been inundating a good chunk of the Ohio Valley and the east, with some much cooler conditions. And they do have some instability with this stalled frontal boundary. That's spun up a little low pressure center, dumping some heavier rains just along the coast and much cooler conditions, especially into Maine. While much of the central U.S. has been highlighted over that ridge of high pressure still sending widespread 100-degree temperatures in much of Texas and very hot conditions really setting up over, a good chunk of the Pacific Northwest. And I do actually feel that continues for much of the week ahead. So let's take a look at the overall setup on the vorticity view. And there's several little features I wanted to highlight. First, out here into the Caribbean, we do have this disturbance where the National Hurricane Center does have a 20% chance of this developing. This will slowly migrate northwest over the coming days, get into the Bay of Campeche, and could bring more heavier rains into portions of South Texas. While this other little feature that was impacting South Texas just the other day is still holding its own. It's got a pretty good swirl to it. Even now, of all places, by El Paso. I mean, gosh, it's dumping some very heavy rain down there, and it's still actually supposed to kind of hold its own for the next couple of days. While again, you can really see that pretty significant trough diving into the Ohio Valley. That'll eventually help eat away this ridge that's been locked over the central U.S. and allow a little bitty cold front that's going to be setting up, coming through on the day to tomorrow. So here's the overall setup for today through to tomorrow morning. We do have that cold front kind of on the move from north to south. And then out ahead of it, we've got all those heavier rains are going to be taking shape on the monsoon flow. And then the remnants of Invest 98L here. There's some beneficial rains will probably pass just south of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex setup, just along the I-20 corridor and points southward, while we do have some heavier rains really starting to sneak in a good chunk of Arkansas, pushing into Mississippi and Alabama through Georgia here, while we have that area of low pressure up into the northeast, dumping some some beneficial rains along those areas that do have that severe drought in place. But especially over the state of Maine today, there are going to be some much cooler conditions just with all the cloud cover and all the heavier rain around. But yeah, going into tomorrow, you can definitely see as this kind of backdoor front pushes in, that's going to allow that weakness and finally say goodbye to those triple-digit temperatures for Oklahoma and a good chunk of Texas, at least North Texas, as that cool front will be inundating those areas and bring much cooler conditions. I mean, all summer long, we haven't seen a map like this of such widespread, actually below normal conditions. So this is a fairly significant cold front for August standards. And that's definitely going to bring a lot of heat relief for a good chunk of the country, but especially in Oklahoma and Texas, where they've been really doing the rain dance lately and trying to get whatever they can to make it rain. And looks like that's actually going to be working in the coming days, because I'm looking at some very heavy rain, especially as we head into next week. But unfortunately, man, it's just been hot and dry, just continue the opposite in much of California, much of Oregon, much of Washington. They're getting hit hard with that ridge, very hot conditions for them. And I think that just continues. But as we go into Saturday, I did mention, that has a little bit of a weakness. So we do have a quick rebound in the central U.S., probably not triple digits, but the 90s do come back as the ridge will start to develop over the top and bring much well above average temperatures well up into Canada, while we have a trough developing underneath in portions of Iowa, heading into Illinois and then into Missouri. But as we get into Sunday, things get kind of interesting. So we are watching that little feature out here into the Caribbean. That's going to be shifting up northwest into the Bay of Campeche. At the same time, we had that little Invest 98L that's moved across. Some of that moisture is actually going to be wrapped up into another secondary frontal boundary as it pushes south. So as we get into Sunday, we've got some very heavy rain setting up over a good chunk of portions of Kansas and northern parts of Oklahoma, as well as into Arkansas here, as this other low pressure will be actually probably dumping some heavier rains into a good chunk of South Texas, again, with what could be potentially Danielle, because it's going to be expending a lot more time over the waters down here into the south, the Gulf of Mexico. So it could have the time to develop into a tropical system. Here's the latest icon guidance, and does have a fairly significant low pressure just south of the border there in south of Brownsville. So this would be on the day on Sunday. So yeah, the combination between the icon and the European, most of the GFS guidance has trying to at least figure out a low end tropical type system trying to form down here, and then potentially impacting parts of Texas with more rainfall, especially southern Texas, as we have that significant trough diving into the midsection of the country. That's going to set the stage for our cold front for next week and bring much cooler conditions, as well as a slow moving front. And there's our indications where it actually could start to stall out, especially as we head into Monday. So here's the setup. Going into Sunday, this is your low pressure center off the latest European down here, dumping some heavy rain right around it. But as we get into your Monday time frame, that's going to be on the move. So what's significant here is look at the winds. I have this map out to show you these winds. They're pretty much flat, right? We've got high pressure center that was lifted over the central US. That's shifting back. That actually sets up a classic flow with these winds just kind of training over the same areas for an extended period of time. And we could be looking at some very heavy rainfall setting up over a good chunk of Oklahoma, especially into Arkansas in this northeastern zone here. We're getting right along the Red River into extreme portions of North Texas. This seems to be the bullseye where this is going to be setting up over a couple of days. And we'll also have some heavier rains, but not as nearly as intense as you would see over a good chunk of Oklahoma and parts of northern Texas, and then especially into Arkansas. But here's the setup for Monday. This is just Monday alone, guys. So this is why I'm concerned about, especially next week. These areas have rarely in a significant drought. So the soil is extremely dry. We could be looking at even flood watches because the ground is so dry out here. It's going to be taking a long time to soak in that part of what typically would soak in, but we're not dealing with the same dynamics as we normally would. So pretty concerned about this setup of very heavy rainfall setting up with 2 to 3 inches at minimum possible over that training convective cells over Oklahoma into Arkansas, getting into northern parts of Louisiana here and extreme portions of Texas, especially northeast Texas, like Paris, Texas, extreme parts of North Texas. That seems to be the bullseye where all the copious amounts of rain, and then you'll still have rain, but much lighter amounts as these winds really start to flatten out. And look, that's even on the day on Tuesday, guys. It really indicates that this system is just kind of locked in place for 2 days, could potentially be 3 days. So the same areas could be inundated day after day over a 2 to 3 day time frame, dumping some very heavy rain, compounding with multiple inches of rain potentially over several days. So there's the setup on Tuesday through Oklahoma, kind of the same areas again. So these are areas that just not have seen rainfall, hardly anything to speak of, but then it just flips like on a dime with this this kind of classic setup, flash flooding setup that could unfold on Monday and Tuesday. The same deal. There's Tuesday set up with multiple inches of rain on the graph here in the left-hand corner of your screen in the purple with 2 to 3 inches very easily over Oklahoma again, Arkansas, getting into portions of Mississippi, heading into Louisiana, again, parts of northeast Texas, North Texas is kind of on the far edge of it. These are going to be fishtailing down as the winds try to move a little bit further south. Some of that areas will finally get into portions of central Texas with those beneficial rains. But the overall setup over the next 3 to 7 days has basically the excessive heat watches continuing pretty much all week for the Pacific Northwest. They continue to remain warm up there, and if not really hot. And then these areas around that remnant low here off the 98L of Invest will still have some heavier rains in combination with the monsoon flow. And then there's the setup over Oklahoma, over Arkansas, getting into portions of Mississippi, getting into central Texas, North Texas. There could be looking at some very heavy rain setting up, especially Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and this actually could extend into Wednesday, folks, as the ridge will lift further north. And as it does, it's going to be creating more of a northwest flow and create more of that push further south as what you would see on Monday and Tuesday. So by Wednesday, I feel this is going to be at least a little bit push on the upper level winds to push it further south into Texas. So now the heavier rains will shift from Oklahoma and probably shift further into central Texas, but that won't be in the day on Wednesday. And of course, that'll shift everything else out towards a good chunk of the Tennessee Valley, and that will extend the portions of the heavier rains extending through the Carolinas and into Virginia. Then as we go into that Wednesday setup, there it is on the satellite imagery, as most of the heavy rains will push further into Texas by then, and then getting into more of a East Texas. But combined over the next 7 days, here's the latest kind of blend of the models. So a lot of models are extremely bullish on this system. I wanted to give you a true depiction what's probably going to be playing out with the overall blend setup here. And you can see the graph in the bottom corner of the screen. We could be looking at at least 2 to 4 inches over the coming week, and a good chunk of Arizona into New Mexico, a good chunk of Texas, but heavier amounts, even 4 to 6 inches is definitely not out of the question. Oklahoma and even to Arkansas, and you could be looking at some isolated areas of 8-inch totals or more. It really depends on, again, these are going to be setting up over an extended period of time with a very slow moving or a stalled front. Those setups, you can see the banding here, right? It's over the kind of the same area. So it definitely indicates training cells over an extended period of time. So definitely these areas, very high concern of a flash flooding setup heading into next week. But beyond that, let's take you to the tropics, right? So this is where I'm concerned. You saw how dry it was in California, right? It's been bone dry. We've been in a La Nina. And in fact, this is the latest setup on the easterly trade winds, and it's not good, guys. This basically implies the La Nina is strengthening with this continual drop and cooler conditions out here in the equatorial Pacific. We have yet another enhanced trade wind setup, this burst of convection. Look, from the 21st through the 1st, this will even amplify the La Nina even further and help strengthen the La Nina even further. We just can't get rid of this thing. Notice the last burst. Notice what happened to the last burst in the equatorial Pacific. How you would read this map is if you have anywhere from a -5 on the Enso index, that would imply a La Nina, which is basically what we've been in literally for 2 years now. So we tried to get out of it, right? We tried to push towards neutral. But man, ever since in the last month, we've basically been in a free fall, and we are literally back to where we started back in May, basically a moderate La Nina status. And now with that continual burst in the equatorial Pacific with that more trade winds, that's just going to push the La Nina and intensify it even further and push it further into moderate territory. That will only start to enhance the other side of the world. On the Atlantic side, you typically have an enhancement in tropical activity when La Nina is in place. You typically have less shear in place, so you get a little bit more susceptible for tropical activity. Plus, we're heading into climatologically, a very favored time frame from essentially August 20th. That's August 20th through the middle of October. About 80% of the system form within that bullseye. So we're starting to put all the pieces of the puzzle together where things already start to look a lot more active in this feature area. Plus, you got climatology on your side. We could be looking at a pretty good ramp up in intensity. It's been very slow right now, but I expect a pretty good ramp up in intensity really for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And it could be getting going as we go into this weekend, because there's that remnant low that has a 20% chance right now. Could be looking at into portions of the southern portions of the Bay of Campeche on this weekend, and the latest EPS guidance has about an 80% chance even right now to form it into a tropical depression down here. So like I mentioned, these waters are very warm. It's going to be spending a lot more time over the open waters than the other system. So if that would have had a lot more time to develop, that would have been a pretty significant storm. It already was, but it could have been really significant because it looked very impressive on satellite imagery. And this could be getting its act together as we head into the weekend. But going forward, like I said, we're in this transition stage where it's been very active on the Pacific side, but now we're seeing the flip, right? We're seeing the La Nina strengthening again. So that puts a lot of sinking air back into the Pacific side. That's indicated on the red shaded area, a lot over the Pacific. And then on the flip side, we got a very active, tropical waves that are coming off the Africa here, indicating on this blue. That basically indicates the vertical velocity index. You got a lot of upward rising motion air, complements of this known Kelvin wave that's coming off the coast, and that will propagate and go into an environment that effectively has a lot less shear. And the latest EPS guidance has more activity. This is the latest 15-day outlook. Definitely on the ensemble member guidance, we're definitely seeing a lot more activity as these tropical waves, one after another, come off the coast of Africa. And it's definitely indicating some of these could get going in the coming days. So I think things are going to be ramping up. And another indication is there's going to be a lot less shear happening in these areas, right? As they come off the coast of Africa, you've got almost little to no shear now and portions of the main development region heading into the Caribbean. So that just amplifies this area even further of more probabilities of these tropical waves trying to hold together and start wrapping it around itself. So I do feel things are going to start to get active. Here's the latest GFS guidance. Essentially implies the same thing, right? We've got more ensemble members kind of hold it together. We got a big Bermuda high to the north that's going to help steer these systems further off into the west. So it puts the Caribbean, it puts the United States, it puts more of these areas into play as far as activity is concerned going forward. So yeah, I do feel like things are really going to start to ramp up in a big way on the tropics for sure. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update while I protect you before and after the storm.